Biblical leadership is both full of love and it's relational, but it's also countercultural. Hi, my name is Cody Archer, and I want to welcome you to this week's Revive Live. I'm so glad that you're here joining our conversation today. I've got with me today Daniel Juster. Thank you for being with me today.
Delighted to be with you.
It's great to have you. It's a privilege for me to have such a father of the Messianic movement to be here in this room with me. Thank you. And we're going to be talking today about leadership. This is a subject that you have had decades of experience with. And not only have you given leadership just in the word, like using words, but you've actually had on-the-ground kingdom fruit. You've been able to raise up congregations, raise up leaders, multiply them. And it's been amazing to watch how God has used you. So I'm excited to glean from you today. And you're also an author of, now you're working on book number 20, which is an incredible feat. You speak all around the world, and you have a family, you have children, grandchildren. You live half of your year here in Israel, even more. And the rest of the year you travel around America primarily, but some other countries as well, investing into leaders and building up congregations. So thank you again. And I just want to encourage you as you guys are joining us today for Revive Live. I want to dedicate some extra time to have engagement with you as you are watching, you're taking part of this conversation together with us. I want you to send in any questions that you have for Dan today. It can be on leadership, it can be on anything else, and I want to try and set a little bit of time towards the end of our chat today to hear from you and have Dan weigh in on some of your comments and questions. So go ahead already, write in the comments below any questions that you have for Dan.
Well, it's a surprise for me how things developed in my life, but I'm happy the way they developed. So.
Yeah, that's good. Well, let's jump in. Dan, a number of years ago, actually many years ago, you wrote a book, Relational Leadership. And I want to talk a bit about what the content of this book includes. But before we do that, I want to just ask, you know, there's so many different books on leadership. What did you see a need for another book? What were you trying to accomplish in writing a book on leadership?
Yes. I was seeking to put out a different kind of model for congregational leadership and intercongregational leadership that had to do with raising up a shaping team. And that what would come out of that shaping team in regards to raising up leaders. This came out of my early leadership struggles. And it's so funny because we now see these concepts becoming very prominent in the business world. You know, the Good to Great book by Jim Collins talks about the great corporations having to do with a shaping team that validates people at all levels of the corporation, so they all want to be part of it and committed to it. And if a corporation can do that, how much should that be the case with a congregation and its members and its people? So there are some key things, and I think they're biblically based.
So you were just kind of looking at the landscape a few decades ago thinking, you know what, there's a hole here that I feel like I need to teach into that and help bring some more clarity.
Yes. See, when we began our ministry in Chicago in 1972, we already had this idea of building people into committed community, that they would be in covenant relations with one another, and that they would build relationships that last, that help one another to grow into the likeness of the Lord. I didn't want to build something that I call a go-to-meeting kind of organization where the meaning of being in a congregation is you attend events, but it was to build your lives together. But even having that basic foundation, I found that it was difficult to build what I wanted to build because I had allowed myself to be placed in the role of meeting the needs of the people.
Yeah, let's actually go into that because you mentioned a little bit about this in the book where you were, I think, still in Bible school and you were pastoring a congregation at the same time, and you ended up hitting a place of burnout in that year, or your final year of school. Take us there.
I had finished theological school by that time, but what happened was we were, you know, we had a smaller congregation in Chicago, and even there it was very, very busy. And I understood that the elders were supposed to help me care for the congregation, that we were supposed to be a shaping team. The shaping team idea came very, very early to me in the mid-1970s. But it wasn't enough, because when I was in Washington and I offered myself to the people, we were in a large congregation, 125, 150, which was very large for the Messianic Jewish world at that time.
Yeah.
But around 1980 or so, I found that we were getting so many phone calls. I logged over 500 calls for help from the members.
Wow.
So we had a lot of
That was in 1 week or 1 month?
1 month. But we had a
month.
lot of
That's
needy
incredible.
people. And so I was starting to burn out.
Mm-hmm.
My wife was starting to burn out on my burning out.
Mm.
And I was going to pastors' fellowship meetings and asking pastors if they were happy in the ministry.
Wow.
And none of them would tell me that they were really enjoying being in the ministry.
Wow.
It was amazing.
So, but let me just clarify a little bit more. When you're talking about the burnout that you started feeling, you were just kind of losing hope. You were just mentally exhausted, spiritually, physically. What were you
Well,
feeling
it was more
exactly?
like, how can you succeed in this? You
Uh-huh.
can never do enough, and it
Yeah.
doesn't appear to succeed enough
Yeah.
in the lives of people. And pastors would give me platitudes instead of answers like, we will reap a reward if we do not faint but continue to pursue good, or God is good. And I said, I didn't ask you if God was good. I asked you if you were happy in the ministry. And then what happened is I met a young pastor who was thrilled with the ministry. He had a strong congregation. It wasn't that large, but it was, very strong in discipleship and the formation of the character of the people. And I asked him if he was happy in the ministry. And he said he was really happy. And I said, do you have time for family time? He said, yes, I do. I said, do you have time for vacations? Yes, I do. And then he looked at me and he said, I believe that you have fallen into the traditional mold of the pastor and what's expected, the traditional role. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, come over to my house and we'll share. So my wife and I went to his house. And that was the most revolutionary evening in my understanding of pastoral ministry that I have ever had to this day.
Wow. And so what did he share with you that evening?
Well, what he shared was that the primary role of the senior pastor is to raise up other leaders to shepherd the flock with him. And that rather being available to all the people and their needs, as much as your heart goes out to them, if you do that, you will fail. And that you have to give your life primarily, and most of your evenings where you're ministering, to shepherd and mentor other people into leadership. And then when you have enough people caring for people through home groups, we call them chavara in Hebrew, enough people that are trained in counseling and shepherding, then you only take the cases that are difficult, that are referred to you, and they're part of sitting in that referral so they can be further trained. This is a revolutionary idea, that the primary job of the pastor is to raise up leaders. And it's funny, I presented to the congregation, to the congregational leader, that this is where we're going to go. And I remember one lady stood up and said, what are we paying you for?
Wow.
If you're going to raise up others to meet our needs, what are we paying you for?
Wow. Wow. So then in that time period, did you visit other congregations that were expressing that new, like, did you have a taste of it, or you're just kind of going into
mostly
new?
By his word, but I did visit his congregation and a
Okay.
few others that were committed to this model.
Yeah.
This is a model that was coming out of what we call the restorationist model of fivefold. Now, what comes under the rubric of restoration and fivefold is everything all over the map.
Yeah.
But we wanted to build something on the basis of intimacy, relationships, caring for one another, not just a big meeting, a big event. A lot of people now are just doing big meetings, events more than ever. I'm not attracted to that.
Yes.
And what we found, of course, Asher and Trader, who's here, he became my first supporter in this new direction. And it began to work. It was just amazing.
Wow.
And we had, within a couple of years, we had raised up a dozen leaders to give themselves primarily to the flock.
That's amazing.
And the whole
Wow.
thing changed dramatically.
So would you then say during that time of transition that you had more people excited and for this new direction than those who were against it?
Yeah, there were three groups. Those that were seeing it and were for it. I had the elders accepted it. But some elders didn't want to give themselves to it, because they didn't want to pay the price of caring for people at that level. But some did. And then new leaders, younger leaders, who were that time in their 20s and early 30s, they really wanted to go with this. They saw it as biblical.
Wow.
And of course, we use the text in Timothy, which I'll read at the proper time. But that became a foundational text for us.
Yeah.
The other thing is we always believed in headship and plurality, meaning that the leader is accountable to the plurality that he leads. He's not a dictator, and really not even the final decision maker. He has to have a majority go with him and not impose on the people. And we want to get the people involved in confirming major directions. We're trying to be a community, not a meeting.
So what then would you say, when I look at the landscape of the body of Messiah around the world, I would say, I don't know the numbers, but I'm guessing, let's just throw out a number, 50% of congregations are built upon the traditional leadership style like you're proposing, that there's one pastor who basically is over everything, and his main focus is not raising up other leaders, but it's just shepherding that flock. Is that what you say?
That's right. And one person put it this way, that the leader of that model gets all the accolades that only he can do the ministry. And he gets a lot of ego out of that, but the price he pays for that ego position is burnout.
Yeah.
And Time magazine, by the way, at the same time I was discovering this, did an article on why pastors burn out and why their suicide rate is high. And it tabulated what the expectation is of a pastor in the traditional role, and they said that there are not enough hours in the week to do this.
Yeah.
He's going to burn out.
Wow. I can even remember as a teenager growing up in a church and thinking the two most difficult jobs in the world are to be a president of a country or to be a pastor of a church. Because I grew up in that model of the one man doing everything and all the pressures and the counseling and the visiting of the hospitals, and everything was in that one person's job description, and I said, that's one job I never want to have.
And the expectations are enormous when you buy into that model, and it's difficult to get the people to understand that you're not going to fulfill that expectation. You're building something else.
Yeah.
You're building a community of interlinked circles with multiple people that are raised up as elder, deacon, shepherds, either, in terms of their level of teaching ability. And we became amazingly coherent, and I found the job to be absolutely delightful. I was the president of the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations as well at the time, and we sought to teach this model in the Union. But I came to love what I did, and still look back on those years as an extraordinary time, wonderful time.
That's amazing. Now let's go back a little bit to the foundation again. Let's go to the question of why. Why would someone even aspire or want to be a leader when so often being the leader, there's the most attacks, the most pressures, the decisions, you're pulled in all these different directions. Why? Why would someone sign up for that?
Because you're driven by wanting to extend the kingdom of God, wanting to do all you can to serve the Lord. And you see it in 1 Timothy when he says, if a man aspires to the office of overseer, elder in Titus, he desires a good work. Why would anybody desire it? Because you're passionate about giving back. You're passionate about seeing people's lives straighten out.
Yeah.
You're passionate about the lordship of Jesus and extending his kingdom. But that passion produces tremendous fulfillment if you embrace it, not for pride, but for service. If you embrace it the right way. And the text that we have always used on this is when Paul says to Timothy, what you have heard of me from among many witnesses, entrust to faithful people who will be able to teach others also. And teaching here does not mean standing at a podium and giving a sermon or a spiritual lecture. Teaching has to do with discipleship. So you could say, entrust to faithful men who will be able to disciple others.
Wow.
And so we look at small groups as the discipling foundation, raising up leaders who are discipling leaders who can disciple others. And it goes on and on. And, there are leaders of tens, leaders of 50, leaders of hundreds, and leaders of thousands. But the rubber meets the road is in that leader of 10.
That's good. And I actually underlined a couple things here in your book that I wanted to bring up on this subject. This is, I believe, in the first or second chapter, and it says here, anyone who is called and serves can move into the leadership functions of Ephesians 4. Leadership is a broader territory for servanthood. It is the willingness to bear greater responsibility and sacrifice for the kingdom of God. The greater the love, the greater the scope of authority one has. You know, one of the things that stood out to me here was, for you, the way you look at someone growing up into a place of leadership isn't primarily based upon that person's gifting. They might be super gifted in a particular area or in leadership, but you're here basing this on love, on relationship, and that being the highest thing that's going to set you up to move forward in leadership.
Sure. And what I see is the number of people that can attain the level of shamash or deacon is much, much greater than the number of people that we're usually seeing. Some people can't attain that. But if you look at the standards for elders and deacons, they're the character standards that you would want for all people. They're the basic standards of discipleship.
Yeah.
Then you're saying that they have to come into a certain gifting as elders and deacons, but that they can attain a basic role of some leadership, I think should be for the majority of people.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, we're coming close to our end here. I just want to encourage our friends again. If you guys have questions for Dan, I want to encourage you, go ahead and write them in, and I want to give a little bit of time to that here in another minute or so. But Dan, I want to finish with this question. You know, you've now had a successful life of ministry for decades, over 40 years. What kind of advice would you give to, let's say, a 22-year-old Dan Juster, now looking back after all these years of experience, and what would you say to yourself today with what you've gained?
Don't try to be
back.
God's man of power for the hour. Share responsibility with others and come into a very strong position of time management so that you are able to balance the time you give to your family, the time for vacation, the time for recreation, and the time for sacrifice in terms of laying down your life for people, which you're always doing, but you've got to do that for your family and for your own personal spiritual life. And you can't cheat on your devotional life. You just can't do it.
Wow, you nailed 4 really big things right there that I think we're going to have you back to talk about those. That's really good. Just go over those one more time. You talked about the quality of our relationship with the Lord, our time management.
Sharing your responsibility with people and not trying to do it all. And having time for recreation.
Wow. We need to talk about that more in depth, because that's already bringing up a whole bunch of different questions for me. Well, Dan, thank you for your time today. I'm going to have you back. We're going to talk more about these things. And can you just remind our friends around the world, they want to connect to you a bit more, they want to go to your website, receive more teachings from you. Where can they do that?
Yes, they can go to Restoration from Zion. That will also connect you to links to Tikkun Global, where all our books are listed. Just about all of them are available for electronic download. We have them on Amazon. And they're on all sorts of different things. They're not just on Messianic Jewish topics. Of course we have that, but we have an apologetics text, we have leadership, we have issues on you know, the nature of mutual blessing, church history. We have a primer on that.
Heaven and hell.
Heaven and hell and the afterlife, prosperity, what the Bible really teaches, spiritual warfare. So, you know, one of the things I am trying to do is to speak into some of the emphases in the larger Christian world today that are really not balanced, that are not solidly based in the Bible. And I'm trying to get us back to look at what the Bible really says.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Dan, thank you for your time, and I so appreciate all the time you have invested into writing, into studying, and it's so clear. I really enjoy your books, and I receive a lot from them, so thank you. And thank you guys also for joining us for today's Revive Live. I'm so glad that you joined this conversation. Go ahead and like and share this, and I'll see you next week on Revive Live.